So, you need help passing a video interview. Well, you've come to the right place because today in this video I'm going to be going through all things video interview. That includes types of video interviews, top tips, and any common questions that you might come across. Now, before we start, I want you guys to head over to my Instagram and follow me, which is at iMentor with 2 underscores for all types of advice on things like CVs and personal statements. So, what types of video interviews are there? Well, you can have one where you're talking to a real person or one where you're answering preset questions. Usually, the ones where you're answering preset questions are at the beginning stages of the interview process, whereas the ones where you're talking to a real person come later on in the process. Now, moving on to some top tips for video interviews. My first top tip would always be do your research. This is because before anything else, it's important to know the history of the company, what they stand for, and even what your role would include. After this, I would also say it's very important to make sure you make notes before your interview. This can include any notes you've just made from your research or potential examples, or just some key points that you want to make sure that you answer in the interview. However, please make sure to keep this brief because it's not something you want to use in the interview as a script or even keep looking at, because that will not come across well to the interviewer or even in the recording when it's being watched later on. You want to keep your eyes at the screen, making sure you're focused and not constantly looking to the side. Another good tip is also to practice your adaptable answers. By doing this, it will allow you to stay prepared, and when I say adaptable, I say that because you don't actually know what will come up in your interview, so it's best to use examples which you can move around other questions and adapt them in different ways. This way you won't be sat there panicking when a question you haven't practiced comes up, which will definitely increase your confidence going into the interview because you know you'll have practiced different types of answers to different types of questions. And now, finally, my big top tip is to make sure you always use the STAR technique within your answers. For anyone that hasn't heard what this is or anything about it, I'll give a quick run through because it's probably one of the best ways in which you can answer all types of questions in your interviews. So, if an interviewer was to ask me a question and I was about to answer, I would firstly start with S, which stands for situation. This is basically where I would give context for the example that I'm about to explain. I would then move on to the task, and that's where I would talk about what I had to do in that situation. E.g., if it was something about time management, I would go on to talk about how I was set a time management task from my manager. Then I would go on to the action. This is basically how I addressed the situation, e.g., how did I go on to then manage my workload. Finally, we also have the result. This is where I will talk about the outcome and skill gained from that example I just gave. So what was the resulting outcome? How did this benefit the company, my work that day, or even my manager? It's important to note here that when you use this technique, make sure you focus on the final 2, as this is really what the employer wants to know. Don't spend too long describing your workplace, as that's only there for context, and they're really assessing what they get out of your action and result. So now, let's move on to some common questions. Within your research, you'll see that the questions can be quite specific to the company or role you're applying for. That's why it's always best to get to know the company first. However, here I've put some standard questions that may pop up. For example, what are your future ambitions? What are your strengths? Tell me about yourself. Describe a time where. How would you motivate yourself? And what can you bring to this role? All these are common questions, and you should always look into these and make them adaptable like I said before. So now what? Well, I would say make sure you research in depth, practice mock interviews, as this will definitely raise your confidence, and that leads on to my final point of just stay calm. This is because you can do all the prep that you want beforehand, but if you're not calm and confident going into the interview, then that could go all out of the window and you've done all that prep for nothing. So make sure you go through everything that you need to and make sure you remain calm. If there's anything you need help with, then make sure you contact me by email or you just leave a comment down below. I hope the video was useful for you, and if it was, I want you to go down below and please smash that like button and subscribe so that I can keep creating content like this and know that you guys are enjoying it.